Federal officials say their most promising lead yet in the Unabomber case has them searching the home tonight of a man who lives south of the small town of Lincoln, Montana.
This one guy sort of stepped toward me, and he sort of had a funny look on his face. And then suddenly he reached out and grabbed me and pulled me out of the cabin. One guy pulled out a gun and pointed it at me, and then they put handcuffs on me. The three guys were the only three that I saw at first, because there was a whole bunch of FBI agents around there that came swarming around after they took me.
Holy crap, there's like 78 agents on the hill that you couldn't even see until after he was arrested. These men were like jumping up and down. They were all happy, slapping each other on the back. We got him, we got him.
We're watching the evening news, and they said they'd arrested a suspect in the Unabomber case, and there was a local angle to the story. Oh my God. And there's my brother, and he's looking like a mountain man, all torn clothes, scraggly hair.
And we were so mad at the FBI because they had promised that our names would not be revealed and that they would notify us ahead of time before the arrest was made.
The FBI has arrested a suspect in Montana after he was fingered by relatives.
First of all, that word fingered bothered me. Doesn't really encapsulate what we went through in terms of the process and the care and the grief that went into what we did.
Neighbors here said that since the 1970s, Kaczynski has been living a solitary life, a reclusive man some called the hermit on the hill.
It was disbelief. It was absolute disbelief. It was so surreal. I never would have thought that my neighbor was sitting in that little cabin, creating bombs and killing people while he lived a half a mile away from us.
Man, now what has man done? Man can't stand himself where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand. Man blames everyone under the sun. Tell me, what has man become? Man can't help himself, don't know where he can run. Man can't run for help, can't stand anybody else. Man don't know where he's from, don't know where he belongs. How would man trade tomorrow for a time long forgotten?
No, it was simply anger and revenge, and I was going to strike back. Try not to get blown up.
What is man become?
When the Unabomber is arrested and identified, especially since he went for 17 years committing these crimes, wow, it's of course it's a feeding frenzy for the media.
We ended up surrounded, kind of in a siege, you know.
Ted Kaczynski's brother, David, who remained secluded in this Schenectady house.
Some people said there were 100 people out there, and some of the children down the block came and marched and said, go away, you shouldn't be bothering these people. That was nice of them.
They weren't leaving with their cameras and their notebooks until we came out and talked to them, and I would have rather walked into fire than walked into those cameras at that moment. It was like the worst possible pain you could be feeling, and then it's all public. Here's my mother, and she's got to go through this now. As soon as we get out the door, all the lights come on, and people are yelling at Mom. They're saying, Mrs. Kaczynski, do you think your son's the Unabomber? And she answered, she said, I don't know. You people know more than I do, I think is what she said.
They attempted to interview Ted immediately after arresting him, and he refused to be interviewed, basically.
Well, they let me know what the investigation was about very soon after even before I was formally arrested. But they didn't ask me any questions about the case. And of course, if they had asked anything that was, about the Unabomber case, it wouldn't have been answered.
I get a call saying you got to go to Montana. You know, at the time there were no GPS capabilities, so we get a paper map and we look at the squiggly black lines leading to this little 500-person nowhere, which is, you know, a hellacious drive over some mountains far away. And we get to the cabin, and the FBI guys are still rousting the place and tossing it like a bear in a garbage can. And they're finding all kinds of clues. They're finding the typewriter. They're finding other writings. They're finding bomb materials. It's a gold mine.
There was notes about the construction of the bombs, selection of the victims, a rough draft of the manifesto. Turned out there was a hoodie and a pair of aviation sunglasses in the cabins.
I was told by the attorney who represented me in Montana that FBI agents were taking items of alleged evidence from the cabin, and they were taking it and showing it to reporters, journalists, and saying, this is such and such a piece of evidence. And this, of course, is a flagrant violation of the Justice Department's own rules.
There were 3 of us in there who were looking at things, and one of the 3 pulled out a box from under Mr. Kaczynski's bed. It was just a cardboard box, and inside it was a plastic bag, and inside the plastic bag was a box wrapped entirely in aluminum foil. And in this cabin, which was extremely smoky, there was a lot of soot, it was a dark place. All of a sudden was this shiny, glowing cube. And at that moment, as in a cartoon, the light bulb lit over each person's head, and the person who was holding it set it down, and we backed away very quietly. And it turned out that was a bomb. It was completely ready to go, had the battery in it, everything else. It seemed apparent that as soon as the weather cleared, Mr. Kaczynski was going to be headed out to deliver that into the maelstream and onto its victim.
The moment I found that out, I realized, thank God we did what we did. Thank God we saved a life, and in the end, I did what I did with the heaviest heart I've ever had. When Ted was arrested and assigned a provisional attorney, the first thing he asked the attorney was, how did they ever find me? And the attorney said, well, it's being reported that your brother turned you in. And again, I heard this third hand, but Ted had said, no, that's not possible. David loves me. He'd never do that. I don't know if it was at that point or at some point he told his attorneys that he would never, ever have anything to do with his family again. That as far as he was concerned, I was no brother.
Then we go for the perp walk when Ted gets trotted out to go to the courthouse. So deputies bring Ted out, and he's walking like a ramrod. And I'm thinking, this is the only chance I'm going to get to talk to this guy. So I jump over the berm and I run over to him while the cops are pulling him off. So I'm talking to the guy.
Ted, did you do it?
Did you kill people? Are you really the Unabomber? He's looking straight ahead. And he turns at one point and says, no. But the interesting thing to me for that is he's very much in control. This is who he is. He's not a guy who explodes, loses it. He's a tightly controlled guy, and he's very smart.
The accused Unabomber was brought from his jail cell in Montana to an airfield in Sacramento Sunday morning. He was sporting a bulletproof vest, plus shackles and handcuffs.
My biggest concern was I didn't want my brother to get the death penalty. The only possible acceptable ending of this is for my brother to get a life sentence rather than a death sentence. I could not picture what it would be like for Mom and me be, looking at the clock, and the hands of the clock are going to midnight, and knowing that Ted's being strapped into a gurney and executed. That was unthinkable.
Are you responsible for these bombings? Sir, are you responsible for these bombings?
It's instantly a circus trial. David, his brother, is positioning to try to get him out of the death penalty. And David doesn't have a whole lot to say, but he's forceful. And Ted is insisting that he's not crazy.
I didn't want to be represented as a lunatic, which is what my attorneys were doing.
A person can be found insane if they have a severe mental defect which causes them not to know the nature and quality of their act or the wrongfulness of their act. But in his case, the evidence that he knew his act was wrong was extensive. And so I think that the defense attorneys knew that they'd have a very hard time with insanity, but their goal was to convey to the jury his degree of mental illness so that they would consider not executing him.
If you look back at pictures that were taken when I was just being brought in by the FBI, you know, I had these old, dirty, ragged clothes on. Well, that's how I dressed in the woods, you know, because there's nobody to see me anyway.
I learned that in the opening arguments for the defense, they planned to show one picture of Theodore Kaczynski as a professor dressed very nicely, and the other was the picture when he's scruffy and being taken out as being captured. So how did this successful mathematician turn into this kind of primitive-looking person?
Meanwhile, the FBI has explored the possibility of having a Montana National Guard helicopter hoist Kaczynski's tiny shack onto a flatbed truck and then haul it out of the deep woods.
I mean, I knew they were bringing the cabin down to Sacramento, but I didn't know what for. This is my lawyer's idea. They did it without my knowledge, and I only found out afterwards that they intended to use it to portray me as mentally ill. Anybody who would live this way is nuts.
Nothing made me think he was some madman. I wouldn't have been interested in visiting with him if I thought he was some psychotic individual who had delusions or something like that. Ted Kaczynski and I started corresponding soon after his arrest in April '96. Between the spring of '97 and the beginning of 1998, I visited him 3 or 4 times. That was quite an experience just for me, and of course I wasn't my ass on the line. Well, it was friendly. Yeah, it was very comfortable. I mean, it was very informal. You know, how you doing, Dad? I guess he just wanted somebody to talk to. I believe I was the only visitor he had. But I saw nothing whatsoever. Nothing even slightly to suggest he was crazy.
The finding that Theodore Kaczynski is competent to stand trial came after he spent nearly 20 hours being examined by psychiatrist Sally Johnson.
And she diagnosed him as competent to stand trial, competent even to be sentenced to death, competent to defend himself, but having schizophrenia.
In prepping for the trial, the defense team was looking for mitigating evidence. These are any factors that could help the team try to convince the jury not to put Ted to death.
The chief investigator on my defense team, she is said to have pioneered what is called mitigation investigation. In other words, she goes around and interviews people who knew this person in the past, and she gets all this background information about people, and in some cases she's able to use this to get people off the death penalty.
But as things went on, matters got more and more tense, because the main thing that he said over and over and over again was, you can adopt any defense you like except insanity defense, which would make a mockery of my work, the whole reason that I exist.
I was shocked by the defense team's decision that when they go to trial, that they were going to use the information of him being 3 years at Harvard University in an experiment.
So part of what the defense team found were fragmentary records of a psychological study that Ted had participated in during his undergrad days at Harvard. The study lasted over a period of 3 years, and they met on a weekly basis. It's never been heard in public.
This is Monday evening, March 14th, 1960.
We have no idea what happened over the course of the 3-year period. This audio only gives us a very small glance into what really happened.
Dyad number 12 is about to begin between Mr. C and Mr. Kaczynski. Mr. Kaczynski's code name is Lawful, L-A-W-F-U-L.
I didn't know about the experiments Ted was undergoing. He never talked about them to me. I don't remember it being a conversation within our family until long after Ted's arrest. My brother was subjected to research that by today's standards would be considered completely unethical.
He was one of the people that I really considered a best friend. I have just a wonderfully warm feeling about him, and I think I used the word lovable. We found common ground, and I remember lots and lots of wonderful discussions, and so I really valued our friendship. It was sad to see that he, as a result of some experiments, withdrew from the friendship. If I had known how evil, and I'll use that word, those experiments were, I certainly would have done something.
Please begin your discussion when you hear the buzzer sound. All right?
Excuse me just a second. Do you think we ought to decide how we're going to go about it, or?
I suppose it's supposed to be a spontaneous discussion.
This experiment basically was an experiment run by Henry Murray at the Harvard Psych Department. But when it comes to these interviews with Ted, the files are sealed. You can't get access to them.
I ought to warn you before I start this that I do not have a very favorable impression of you as a result of reading your philosophy. But let me just tick off a few preliminaries, then we'll get into what I really didn't like.
What we do know for certain is that Henry Murray was looking into the effects of stress on human beings. Specifically, he was looking at interrogation strategies and techniques and how human beings are able to kind of be resilient to aggressive interrogative tactics.
It was very unpleasant. That was the point of the experiment. He wanted to understand the dark sides of human beings and the light sides of human beings.
First, I mean, in spite of the fact that you've explained this subjective reality, I mean, I think this is essentially an asinine point of view.
Yes.
Murray subjected them to harsh critiques of their ideas, and he was very interested in seeing how they responded, how they performed when there was really a stressful situation.
Ted was told he was going to be debating political philosophy with a fellow student. How tempting that would have been.
It was not a debate. It was a full-on aggressive attack of Ted as a human being, as Ted is an intellect.
You made one flat statement that the individual owes nothing to society, and this is an insipid remark because I don't think that you...
You couldn't do those experiments today, but you certainly could in 1958 to 1962. There was nothing at the time of an objection to what Harry was doing. It was simply taken for granted that that was how you conducted research of that kind.
Ted was deceived. He didn't know that this person had a script and the person's objective was to humiliate and traumatize him.
I sensed an overriding sense of, I don't know whether I'd call it weakness or fear, that just sort of permeates your entire philosophy, and I can understand it, seeing you, talking with you.
The goals were not malicious or malign in any way. Why would they be? Why would this man who'd been working in psychology for decades and who had produced some of the best psychologists in the United States at the time, why would he engage in malignant interrogation?
Henry Murray was a very high-ranking academic, very successful career with well-established expertise in interrogations. And he was very involved in developing interrogation techniques for the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, the Second World War precursor of the CIA. So interrogation, as we all know, is questioning somebody to try and find out did they commit a crime. Enhanced interrogation is when you add on all these mind control methods, drugs,
hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, good cop, bad cop techniques, whatever you can dream up to try and get something out of somebody.
Henry Murray was not an evil scientist. There's some plausible arguments to be made that he had some connections with the CIA. He was very proud of his service to the country and took working with the CIA, if he did, as part of that responsibility. He was a responsible citizen, and the country needed good assessment of personnel. So he could provide that better than anyone else could.
I was a career operations officer in the CIA who became involved for a time in the interrogation of one of the top members, we believed, of Al-Qaeda, and thereby was involved for that time in the enhanced interrogation program, which is torture and is mind-altering procedures. My experiences, tragically, are directly relevant to the experience Kaczynski went through because the methods used by the CIA were directly derived from, not just inspired by, what Murray was trying to do in the 50s and early 60s. And that is that you can break somebody down and you can alter their minds. The theory was you will be psychologically broken down and dislocated so that you can then be reformed as a cooperative source.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, get a chance for some defense here.
Well,
I mean, well, you say
you're defending yourself.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you
if able.
The idea that Harry Murray was the villain, a malignant character, and that Theodore Kaczynski was the victim, all of that is nonsense. It's simply without foundation.
Pouring with the
Don't interrupt me, please. On this avoiding of society, or of this society is a bad thing, is that why you're trying to grow that beard?
No.
I mean, are you conforming with the nonconformists?
No, I'm not conforming with the nonconformists.
Well,
if I were conforming with the nonconformists, if I were conforming with the nonconformists, I mean, really, this isn't really a beard yet.
You're darn right it's not.
Ted was a child when he was exposed to these experiments. He was 16, 17, so it is absolutely possible that this study had a profound impact on Ted's neurobiological development.
Thousands of students all over the United States performed very ably in these kinds of experiments without a problem. I do not believe that the testing at the Harvard Psychological Clinic did anything at all to transform Theodore Kaczynski.
You haven't really criticized my views except in that you have applied labels. You have not analyzed them in any way and attacked them logically.
Well, there isn't too much to analyze, Mr. Kaczynski. It's a lot of garbage.
Ted had built his entire life and his entire sense of self and pride in himself on his intelligence, on his intellect, on his ability to think and critically reason and use logic. And this study, what it did is it slowly tore that away from him.
You don't seem to me to have the courage of your convictions. Where you do, then your convictions tend to be all wet. And I think you've taken your own shortcomings and attempted to compensate for them.
No, you've just been applying labels.
Anyone who wasn't...
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Ted had told his attorneys, and they relayed it to me. They asked him, Ted, why did you put up with this for 3 years? I mean, these people were just humiliating you. Why did you put up with this? And he basically said, well, I wanted to show that I could take it, that I couldn't be broken. And the thought that occurs to me was, well, maybe sometimes it's better to be broken than to be hardened.
He was rapidly withdrawing from, I mean, he was really becoming what might be called paranoid or whatever, but he was rejecting other people. And according to what I heard, it was following the start of these psychology experiments.
It's perverse, it's sick, it doesn't work, and it's wrong in every conceivable way. But that's what Kaczynski was subjected to.
Those experiments could have really fueled the fire and really made him distrust the powers that be, the authorities, and be hostile towards them. And it's not hard to imagine that when he's being attacked and discredited and broken down, he's going to have some sort of counterattack psychologically. So he's going to have to become counter-rigid, counter-certain, and counter hostile, and then he just turns that into behavior in the world.
We began to think about how this 3-year experiment in which Ted was involved, that might have triggered his schizophrenia.
I think it would be a mistake to have this simple reductionistic formula and said, oh, you know, Kaczynski was made into the Unabomber at Harvard. That's much too simplistic, but certainly those studies were harmful to him.
What was revealed, I think, beyond question, was that his lawyers were death penalty liberals, I guess you would say, that anything goes to protect his life.
Kaczynski stopped the trial when he demanded to defend himself earlier this month. But Judge Burrell says the request may have been too late.
He called one time, and I said, Ted, there's something you got to know. I think you're the last person who doesn't know this. It's an insanity defense and nothing else, straight up. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, why the lying bastards. It was kind of amazing.
If the Unabomber is schizophrenic, it kind of undercuts his whole mission. People say, oh, these are the deeds of a madman. You know, you'd have to be crazy to be so concerned about technology that you'd do what Kaczynski has done. Ted wanted to fire his attorneys. He didn't want anyone saying he was mentally ill.
The judge said it's too late in the trial. It would take too many months for new attorneys to get up to speed. He said, all right, then I'll represent myself. I don't want these attorneys representing me.
And the judge simply said, you don't have the right to just throw all this out at this stage of the game. You just don't. So I'm ruling against it. You are stuck with them, and you were stuck with their defense. Insanity. And that night he tried to kill himself. He tried to hang himself.
This is not manipulation. This is not cunning. This is not an attempt of someone to escape legal process. This is a very heartfelt reaction on his part.
You know, he felt that everything he had worked for now was going to be, you know, made out as mental illness, that he was not in control.
The trouble was that my attorneys put me in a position where either I had to let them go and represent me as a madman to the world, or else I had to accept the plea bargain.
In California, the trial of the Unabomber has come to an abrupt end, just as opening statements were about to start. Ted Kaczynski pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for life in prison.
I got a call to say that I could go down and give the victim's impact statement. As I'm reading my statement, I go through it. Ted Kaczynski had been sitting at the desk. He had a yellow legal pad, taking lots of notes. And there comes a point in the statement I say to him, you know, Ted, I don't hate you. I forgave you. And I forgave you a long time ago. And in that second, when I told him that I forgave him, his pencil dropped, and he just looks at me. Like, I've got these eyes staring right back at me. And for me, it was the perfect transference. It's like, nope, you own it. Now, I've transferred it to you. You carry it. I've carried it a long time. I mean, I think it shocked him because he wasn't expecting any empathy from anybody.
Well, on the day he was sentenced from the plea deal, I visited him one last time, and all of the lawyers were all gone, the hundreds of the international media, 2 blocks long of stuff, all gone, all over. And that was the last I saw him, and I said, so what was that like? How did that feel? And he said, well, it was the damnedest thing. They brought in all these people who were weeping and wailing, but the plea deal had already been arranged, already been agreed to. So what is the point? And I thought to myself, well, you killed their loved ones, might be one reason. It was a little bit chilling. Like, you don't know why these people would want to come and express their grief, or, you know, that didn't seem to be part of it.
It's an ultra-secure prison. We have 122 prisons in the federal prison system, but there's only one Supermax. If you were going to design a person to do Supermax time, it's Kaczynski. It's Kaczynski. He has the ability to not need others. During my tenure there, he was a model inmate.
What worries me is that I might, in a sense, adapt to this environment in the sense that I will actually become comfortable here and not even resent it anymore. And I'm afraid that as the years go by, I lose my memories of the mountains and the woods. And that's what really worries me.
I'll tell you a good story. I was camping in my favorite spot. It was the best place there was in that country. And while I was making the huckleberries, I could hear ravens kicking up a big fuss. I was wondering what these ravens were making such a big fuss about. And all of a sudden, I heard this tremendous whooshing sound, and I thought, my God, am I being buzzed by an airplane? And I looked up, and here's a golden eagle that goes diving past me, within like 10 feet or so of my head, with the 4 ravens chasing it. And the golden eagle, it landed next to some bushes further up the gulch, and it sort of put its back to the bushes so it could face off the ravens that were harassing it. And I kept walking up the gulch, closer to the eagle, and finally it took off, and it flew past me. It must have been within 6 feet of my head. It flew so close, and these 4 ravens still after it. I don't get to see outside at all. My window just looks out on this concrete and steel recreation area, so.
Don't you think that's going to drive you crazy?
No, it won't drive me crazy.
I'm not worried that they're going to break my spirit, and I don't think they will ever convert me as far as attitudes and opinions are concerned.
He's Ted Kaczynski. He controls the box. We control the prison. He controls the box.
Like most political terrorists, he wants to have a soapbox for his cause. He knows that he has a conduit to the outside world where he can send his writings.
He must spend hours a day writing. I would say he probably is satisfied that he's been able to communicate with people and get the ideas out, get books published.
He can be a voice for what he wants to get done.
An environmental group claimed responsibility for the blaze, which caused an estimated $12 million in damage. The group says it was protesting an expansion of the resort that threatened wildlife.
I think the Unabomber, to a lot of kids in the mid-'90s and late '90s, yeah, I think Ted was an inspiration. And they were going out to about 10 to 15 western states burning shit down.
One reason why I think actions like the Dale arson are useful, an action like that tends to increase the sense that something is going on, the sense that there's tension in society, and it gives the activists themselves a sense of purpose. It's important.
They were ratcheting things up. It wasn't just blockades anymore, and it just wasn't peaceful, nonviolent protest.
I think Kaczynski thinks of himself as a revolutionary in the sense that people feel very powerless against this, in anarchist circles, often it's called the mega machine. This whole industrial society. He was kind of a vanguard that wanted to demonstrate that you can fight back against the system.
Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Yeah!
It seems to me that there are discontented groups that could be very useful if we could, so to speak, recruit them. Then, when the right moment comes, they will be in a position to spread.
Get out of here! Get the fuck out of here!
The thing is that people will tend to be attracted to a movement not only on the basis of agreeing with its ideas, but if they see it as an effective of having a clear-cut agenda, cohesive and purposeful and active.
He's the latest in a long history of people who have struck out against society's norms, thinking that they knew the way to solve them through violence.
In certain quarters, there is a rejection of modernity among Muslim militants, and I'm wondering to what extent it might be useful to our movement to carry on discussions with the Muslim militants and see whether there is a sufficient common ground there for any sort of alliance.
It's dangerous for him to encourage others to try to follow that model and talk about, write about, advise other activists to take human life. It's not the way forward. There has to be a red line for activists. I think Kaczynski's way was not the right way. I think his writing was the right way.
If you put the doctor name on there, you had it as part of a course at the college, and you studied it, we wouldn't be as shocked. I'd say he's 90% there. And if you haven't read it, you're going to say, gosh, this warden's, he drank the water. Stockholm Syndrome is kicking in. He's getting too close. Kaczynski must have hypnotized him or whatever. No, writing is writing. Academic and criminal activity could be separated here. It's today. It's today on paper. Hey, I get it.
If we look at the problems that have progressed in the last, say, 20 years since the manifesto came out, virtually all areas of concern have gotten worse. And the root cause of all these problems is advanced technology. All the evidence suggests that he was right, that the system is at the root cause of these problems, that we cannot control it, we cannot stop it, and very quickly we may even lose the ability to even undermine the system, and then it will be too late.
I just can't understand the leap of having to do it with violence and killing innocent people. If you go right to the part that says, I might have to hurt people to get this word out because otherwise they might not print it, that's bent. There's victims, there's people that were harmed. And what do we want? If you want him to die, keep him where he is. He'll probably die. Ted's in a box. Most likely, his next box will be underground.
In Sacramento today, a redwood was dedicated to the memory of Gil Murray, Kaczynski's last victim. Prosecutors say that bomb was so devastating that Murray's family was left with nothing to bury but his feet.
You had a program to try to improve the world. How much improvement is it when you're killing people off doing it?
Every time I reach out to do something, I'm reminded by the lack of dexterity in my hand. I mean, this will always be with me. There's no closure. My arm doesn't suddenly come back on Monday when he's sentenced.
There's no such thing as closure. There's different, there's better, there's all kinds of other words, but there's no closure. Closure means it's done. It's never done. It's not ever going to be done. But I don't believe in being a victim. I believe in being a survivor and making a difference and fighting.
Little by little, part of our healing began to come about through contacts with some of the victims. I think it was Linda's idea. She says, you know, we should really write to those people and apologize and tell them, you know, no matter how much we're trying to save Ted's life, it doesn't mean that we devalue their loved one's life.
He called one evening and he had to leave a message. And so I was like, well, I'm David Kaczynski, so really uncomfortable for him. But a little while later, when he and I finally connected, I just said, hey, David, this isn't your burden to carry. It's going to get better, but you can't carry this one. And so I said, if you ever need to talk, just feel free, 24/7, just call me.
And he's become a dear, dear friend of ours, of many years standing.
I think it was kind of ironic, but a lot bigger than me, that two guys could, you know, go through crap and then come together.
And to me, that's what gives me some hope, the idea that there is this, you know, sort of this goodness in people that transcends the anger, the violence, the the prejudice, the bad things we see from time to time, there is a core of humanity that's just like...
Man, now what has man done? Man can't stand himself where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand. Man blames everyone under the sun. Tell me, what has man become? Man can't help himself, don't know where he can run. Man can't run for help, can't stand anybody else. Man don't know where he's from, don't know where he belongs. How would man trade tomorrow for a time long forgotten? Man, now what has man done? Man don't understand. What has man become?